Dolly. One of these days we need to do a podcast intro that doesn't involve me singing or you trying to stitch me up with Miss Dolly.
I
But
don't
never
think we
mind.
do. I don't think
Today
we
is
do.
not that day.
Throughout this lockdown, whilst I'm in control of what I can call you on this on Zencaster, we will be starting with a song, and you have to sing it.
Lovely. Good. All right.
Although I would
Well,
have, most people would have gone 9 to 5. You went "Good Golly Miss Dolly," which was that Little Richard,
yeah. Why not?
maybe. It's interesting. Interesting take.
I love the fact that we're 10. Is this episode 10?
Yeah.
Holy sugar snaps. Episode 10.
Oh,
And yeah, well, we should have had a little fanfare.
happy decade, my friend.
Happy decade to you too. But I love the fact that you're still naive enough to ask me, was that Little Richard? Yeah, of course it is, mate. Yeah. Why not? And if it's not, then one of our lovely listeners will get in touch. So please do. Thank you for that.
Very true.
Hello. Hello, dear listener. Welcome to another seamless start to a podcast introduction. My name's Fitz, and somewhere over the rainbow is Mr. Turner. How are you, mate?
I'm very well, thank you, my friend. How are you?
Living the dream. If the dream is to hurt your neck and shoulder simultaneously, when what do you think I was doing, by the way, when I hurt myself? I've hurt myself, dear listener. What do you imagine I was up to in my
Your
youth?
your neck and shoulder.
Yeah,
And you're 34,
bearing in mind how young and cool I am.
so 34 and not. So I'm gonna maybe helping your father-in-law lift a TV.
Oh, I wish it was as
That's
glamorous
like
as that.
it's like a middle-aged kind of task, that isn't it?
I wish it was as glamorous as that, mate. No. I literally was putting my shoe on as I went to take the dog out, and I put my shoe on and went, "Oh, there we go. That's painful," and that's me now. Old Fitz is gone, and now painful, creaky bones Fitz is here in his place,
Excellent.
and
Well,
I'm fine with the new world, mate. Not a problem at all. Not a problem
hello,
at all.
hello, Creaky Bones Fitz. It's nice
Hello.
to meet you.
Oh dear, it's not nice to be here, but it is nice to be here. It's nice to be
If you
here
learn
with you.
if you learn the saxophone, that could be your name,
Creaky bone Fits.
Creaky Bone Fitz.
Nice, good. Yeah, that'd be good.
Yeah,
That was very witty for you, mate. I'm quite impressed. Nice
thanks
work.
very much.
Um, yes, but other than that, I'm all right. By the time this one goes out, I will have done my first ever virtual gig, which, as we record, is in just a few hours' time. I mean, I would say that I've forgotten how to be comedy. So that's happened in good time. Really buzzing for it, to be honest, mate. Really looking forward to it.
Sounds it. Sounds it.
Mm.
And where? Because I'm going to watch that. And can you watch it like retrospectively? Say if I missed it, could a listener go back and watch it?
Good question. One to which I will try and find the answer. I'm not sure, but I reckon you can probably record a bit of it. Can you do screen record? I mean, there's licensing rights aplenty, licensing questions aplenty there. But if I give you permission to record me and we play a little bit on the pod, if it goes well, that could work. Yeah.
Let's see what happens. Yeah, why
Yeah.
not?
Nice. Well, you're
Yeah.
technical director, so I'll give you the idea. You make it happen, and we'll be good to go. I'm sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thanks for that. Good.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks to you, mate, for your hard work as always.
Couldn't think of anything better than to sit at home and listen to you even more than I already do.
Oh yeah, you'll get to see me though. I think the webcam thing is a thing, so yeah, it'll be fine.
Yeah, that'll be a delight.
And
Yeah.
and you know that I'm in pain, so every word and every movement is genuine agony. So
Yeah,
you'll get
that's very true.
a
Actually, yeah,
little bit of joy from that.
might be worth my while tuning in. Eh?
Damn straight. So La Decima, we are here, episode 10. It's what a belter of an episode, and it's almost like we planned to have an absolute humdinger of a guest on, but it's the luck of the draw. It's how it's worked out, and I'm really pleased with the episode that we had.
Yeah, I am. I learned so much. It very quickly this episode became a right. What can we teach Sam? Didn't it?
It did, and so the episode that you're about to listen to, again, sure you'll have probably seen the detailed notes that we put up every week. But this the guest this week is none other than Mark Olver. Now, if you know comedy, you will know Mark Olver. He is a fantastic compere, fantastic comedian, and he does loads and loads of work doing things like TV warm up, which we discuss during the interview. It's fascinating. It was absolutely fascinating to kind of speak to Mark. Obviously, I know him, but it's been a little while since we've spoken, so it was really nice to catch up with him. And Mark was, I mean, he's one of the most interesting people I think I've ever met, which is really cool. But B, from a comedy perspective, he has got some stories to tell, and
He really does. Yeah.
yeah, what a lovely guy, really, really lovely. And he's kind of got a bit of a reputation on the circuit for being really willing and able to help younger comics as they start to take their first steps. And I mean, he echoed that by giving you some really good advice, didn't he?
He really did, yeah, and it kind of seemed to come in thick and full. I've got so much homework this week now, from him, which I'm very thankful for. Don't get me wrong, but yeah, it was a brilliant chat, and I really do hope to actually meet him one day. He's got, like you say, he's got some great stories, some of which if people out there like name drops, then he's very, very good friends with the likes of Russell Howard and John Richardson, as he used to live with them. So there is a little bit in this episode for everybody. It's a great conversation.
Definitely, yeah. And what's one of the really interesting things that we discuss is the project that he's I guess he founded a couple of years ago, called Belly Laughs. And stick around at the end of the episode, because we're going to share some exclusive news about a similar event that might be coming to a online space near you very soon. So I don't think I could be any more cryptic without being any more annoying. So yeah, stick around. I love this episode. I think it was an absolute banger. And yeah, we'll tell you more on the other side.
That we will. See you in a bit.
Au revoir. An absolute treat for us this week, no doubt about it. We're joined by Mark Olver. Now, Mark's one of the first people I met, first friends I made in the world of comedy. A fantastic compere, fantastic comic. We mentioned him in the compere episode a couple of weeks ago. A lot of people have been quite busy during lockdown, but I think few have probably been busier than Mark. Anyway, without any further ado, I'd love to introduce Mark to Sam. Hello, Mark. How are you?
Well, do you know what? I was all right, but now I am absolutely gobsmacked and annoyed that I was not invited to do the compare episode. What? What?
So it's a little bit of a pattern emerging, but what happens is we sometimes start talking. So we did an episode a few weeks ago, which was initially musical inspirations. That then turned into our kind of dream band, and then we started doing kind of a comedy night, and then it turned into a conversation about compare. So had we invited anyone, I promise you would have been right at the top of the list.
So it wasn't a planned compare episode.
Exactly.
Oh, okay. Well, I take my
the glimpse behind the magician's cloth here, yeah. But yeah. So well, that's kind of how we first met, actually, isn't it? Through you comparing. But how are things going? How's lockdown for you?
Do you know what? It's okay. It's definitely up and down. I don't trust anyone who answers that question without a question mark at the end. So when someone says, "How are you?" I trust people who go, "I'm all right." And even when they're not all right, they go, "You're not great." Because I think only a sociopath would go, "Yeah, I'm great, actually. Yeah, it's all brilliant." Because we are in a global pandemic. We are in an absolutely unique experience, and the fact of the matter is, even if a unique experience is an amazing experience, you are still going, yeah, it's all right. So, I'm a big fan leaning into the uncertainty.
I think you're right. I think that's in many ways that's all we can do. And Sam, I'm sure you won't mind me sharing. Sam's one of the how did you refer to it? A golden ticket winner with your your letter for 12 weeks of self isolation.
Yeah, that was it. Yeah, like Willy Wonka's factory, I got a golden ticket that says I have to stay inside for 12 weeks. Yeah, one of those lucky people that can't leave the house, unfortunately.
Is that for health?
Yeah, so I've got Crohn's, so I'm on like a immunosuppressant medication for that, and means if I get it, it will be bad. So yeah, it is what it is. But you've got to make the best of it, I think, haven't you? Like I've trying and really badly learning piano, and also trying to be a comedian, which is I think harder than learning the piano. I've got to admit.
Yeah, well, it's not the easiest thing in the world.
No. Interestingly, if I may, so that's actually you may not remember, Mark, but blimey, 8-9 years ago when I literally first started, there was a sport relief or comic relief thing at Comedia, where you very kindly offered advice to people before a live show. Do you remember that by any chance?
I do. I did my essentially hour-long version of a comedy course.
You did, and it was brilliant. I found the footage of that the other day, and as you will find out, Sam, if you get into comedy, your first gig or early gigs will be very, very different to how you are a bit later on down the line. That's for sure.
I can well imagine, mate. I can well imagine.
So, I mean, I guess one of the best things perhaps to do, Mark, if it's all right, would be to, if you don't mind sharing a little bit about kind of how you got into comedy, and tell our listeners a little bit about you, if that's all right.
Yeah, shall I start from the beginning and go chronological up to now?
That would be amazing. Yeah, absolutely. That'd be brilliant.
How does that sound? Because Sam is the musician here, Sam can look after the timing of this. Sam, I'll try and do it in 90 seconds or less. Are you all right with that?
Wow. I can work with that, yeah. Sure.
I've been gigging for 22 years. It'll be 22 years in October. And I reckon I can do the whole thing in 90 seconds or less.
Amazing. Well, look, I'm going to start a stopwatch, and I'm going to tell you when to go, and we'll do this live. Right, I am ready. So tell us your life story in comedy, Mark. Go.
So I was always just a massive comedy nerd, right from the age of like 11 or 12. Loved stand-up, went to university, graduated from university, went to see loads of gigs. Didn't know what I wanted to do in my life. And then about a year or so after graduating from university, I started gigging. I knew act nights in Bristol, open mic nights in Bristol. Coincidentally and quite handily for me, from a friendship point of view, my first ever gig was with Russell Howard. We became best mates, and then frankly from there you just build and build and build. You do slightly longer gigs, you learn on stage, you do as many gigs as possible. I got into comparing quite early, and I compared as much as possible while having a full-time job. And then I got into TV warm-up in 2004. And TV warm-up is a bit like comparing, but the skills are slightly different. It pays more. And then gradually, I've just got more and more TV warm-up for shows like Deal or No Deal, and Have I Got News for You, and Would I Lie to You, and 8 out of 10 Cats. How long have I got left?
You are at 1 minute 14. So 15 seconds.
So I've got about 15 seconds left. And I've just had a really bloody lovely career until about March this year, and it all imploded. The end.
That's well, you know what? That ended bang on 1 minute 28.
There you go. For me, it's all about gigging as often as possible. It's all about working. It's all about getting on stage, whether it's doing stand-up, whether it's comparing, whether it's doing warm-up. Do you know what? I imagine it's the same for music as well. Stage time is one of the most important things, I think, about being uh, a stand-up and being a creative in any way, whether it's writing, it's just doing it, really.
Couldn't agree more. Absolutely, one of the first things that certainly I learned in comedy, I guess, was you can sit in a room and you can write and you can create jokes, but actually getting out there and telling them, and like you say, for any creatives, I guess it's the same. Is the only way really that you can improve. So yeah, couldn't agree more. You mentioned something really interesting, which I know is an absolute passion of yours, which, well, of course, the Bristol comedy scene. Now, I don't live in Bath anymore, but lived there for kind of 10, 11 years. So that was the Bath and Bristol comedy scene was my first kind of foray into the world of comedy at all. And I mean, how do you think the scene is at the moment, excluding the current climate, obviously, before that?
Do you know what? It's fine. I think the Bristol comedy scene is kind of emblematic of the comedy scene all over the country at the moment, which is there are some brilliant gigs, some brilliant professional gigs like the Comedy Store, the Stand, the Glee clubs, the Comedians. They're amazing clubs. And there's a lot of brilliant new material nights. There's a lot of brilliant open mic nights. There's some amazing gigs. It's not always easy nowadays to make a living from comedy because there are more comedians than there ever were, and there are fewer gigs than there were maybe 10 years or so. So the great gigs keep running. Um, Sometimes the smaller gigs, unfortunately, have to fold, but there's a lot of brilliant new acts. There's a lot of brilliant people coming up. I just hope they have the opportunities that I had to kind of basically make a living from it, really.
Yeah, for sure. I can only imagine how tough it is to kind of break through. But once you're there, it's got to be. It was so you said you're in full time employment. How was the leap from full time employment to kind of full time comedy?
Do you know what? It was okay because what I had to do, I had to give up the job because I was doing so many gigs and I was kind of I spent about 18 months or so probably having about 4 hours sleep a night and traveling, I don't know, 50,000 miles a year, genuinely, because I was coming back
Wow.
after every gig wherever I was to go into work the next day. And so, although luckily I wasn't ridiculously well paid in my job, it was a lovely job, but I was a careers advisor, so it wasn't as if I was a investment banker or someone who works in marketing. So at the end, it was just a point of going, well, I can't really keep doing the gigs that I'm doing and work. And frankly, I'm not very good at mornings, so that was the thing that got me
That's
over.
amazing.
And so you were a careers advisor. When did you take the leap, as it were?
2004. So I did a package show in Edinburgh, and basically very quickly the Edinburgh Festival, the whole of August. Um, it's known for hour-long Edinburgh shows. It's known for those sorts of things. But what you do is the first time you usually go up to Edinburgh, you tend to do what they call a package show, which is 3 or 4 comics on one show for the whole month. And I was offered one of those in 2004. And because that meant being away for the whole of September, it meant that I couldn't work, and so I had to give up the job to go up to Edinburgh, and then never came back.
Nice. And
That's amazing.
it's often you've kind of almost been forced into it, but clearly it's what a great decision, what a great decision it was. So early days then, because I'm again, like yourself, I was always a bit of a kind of comedy nerd. I've always enjoyed stand up. Who did you look at in terms of acts that were either on the circuit that you knew or didn't know, and did you have anyone that was an inspiration to you?
Oh, I had a slight. Well, no, it's a bit of a weird one because I had a slightly unusual comedy education. Is that my favourite comics were American comics of the 1950s and 60s. So,
Oh wow.
um, although I liked, because I'm 45, and so I got into stand up when sort of I was about 10 or 11. So, I kind of, when I was old enough to get into Bill Hicks and people like that. But even before then, I was into Lenny Bruce and Mort Sahl and Bob Newhart and Woody Allen's early stand up and stuff like that. And actually, it's a piece of advice that I've given new acts before. And Sam, because I know the whole point of this, Sam, is to try and turn you into a stand up comedian.
Yeah.
Would you like Mark Olver's secret advice that I rarely share? I only share it with my favourite people.
I would love nothing more. Yeah, of course.
Okay. This is a good one. This is a really good one. All right. So this is a
I
little bit
can't wait.
sneaky. This one. So basically, a lot of comedians that you will see. Actually, Fitz wasn't one of them, but Fitz will know who these people are. A lot of people, consciously or subconsciously, can't help but steal from other comedians, and I don't mean stealing their jokes and stuff. They just get heavily influenced by the people that they enjoy. So they get heavily influenced by Russell Howard or Stuart Lee or Russell Brand or Michael McIntyre. And what happens there is that you get influenced by them and you can't help yourself. And then other people start comparing you to those comedians. That's fair, isn't it, Fitz? You would say that there are comedians that you know who have been heavily influenced by other people?
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that, and I think the whole issue or the whole notion of persona is a really interesting one, and the most successful comics, and I'm sure I expect you would agree as well, but the most successful comics are the ones who have a very clear kind of voice, a very clear persona of who they are, and people who you mentioned who perhaps are heavily influenced by and perhaps trying to be like said former comics, it's not who they are, and therefore, yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think it's quite evident that there are a few like that.
Absolutely. So the way to do it is to steal and be influenced by comedians that no one has heard of. So because if you watch a lot of comedy from the 1950s and 60s, if you watch a lot of Dick Gregory or Jonathan Winters, if you're a comedy musician and you listen to Flanders and Swan, or a monologuist and you listen to Joyce Grenfell, you listen to any of these people, Nichols and May for sketches. If you listen to any of these people and you get influenced by them and you learn their lessons, actually, that's a really great way of learning, because what you're learning from someone incredibly different. Your experience is not the people learning from uh, Peter Kay or Ricky Gervais. You're learning from someone who's basically, this is my tip, who only ever did their stuff in black and white.
Wow,
Because
okay.
Amazing.
um, because that stuff's harder to find, and also because the rules are the same. And if you break it down, so many of their skills are so similar, and the techniques they use are so similar to now. But their references and even sometimes their language is so archaic that people might not realize. So many more people than we realize as modern day stand-ups have been influenced by Dave Allen, for instance. And for some reason, Dave Allen was such a massive comic in the 70s and 80s, but for some reason has never been kind of put into the same pantheon as some of the other classics like Billy Connolly. But
Yeah,
actually,
yeah.
you look at what Dave Allen did and you look at how Dave Allen did it. If an open spot nowadays was a bit like Dave Allen, no one's going to go, oh, he's a bit Dave Allen, isn't he? They just wouldn't.
That's such good advice. That is such sound advice. That's a really good point, because I've been kind of looking at, like, what kind of style of comedy do I want to do? What will be my voice? Is it going to be, am I going to get into prop comedy, or like you say, like, kind of musical comedy? Where am I going to go? So I look at the guys like Tim Vine and stuff, but actually I need to go earlier, don't I?
Oh,
That's
yeah. I
such
mean,
sound advice.
go all the way back to Max Wall. Go all the way back to. I mean, especially sort of like jokey jokes. If you were going, sort of one-liner stuff, and you go, yeah. I mean, look at some of Woody Allen's 1950 stuff. Yeah, you can. People nowadays might still do the sort of the Woody Allen impression on stage, a little bit meek, a little bit intellectual. But actually, if you look at the writing that he did, and a lot of those comics who came out in the 50s came out of writers' rooms for TV. So their writing was absolutely brilliant. And you go back there and, you mix it up a little bit. So why not be influenced by Joan Rivers just because Joan Rivers is a woman? If you listen to her topics, her style, her voice, if a
A
bloke,
lack of fear.
yeah, exactly, all that sort of stuff. It because comedy's really. You're a musician, Sam, and I don't know your particular background, but it would be very weird for modern day musicians to only be influenced by people who started making music after 1985.
Yeah, that's very true. That's very 100%. I guess my biggest inspiration would be the likes of Jimi Hendrix and Elvis and people like that. So yeah, spot on.
Yeah,
I
and then you
I haven't ever thought of that.
look at who
Yeah.
look at who Elvis and the Beatles were influenced by, and they always say about the Beatles. I'm reading this amazing book about the Beatles. Tune in, this giant 1,500-page book about them, and when you look at the fact that they lived in Liverpool and they were getting all the records off of American sailors coming over from America. So actually, we look at bands being influenced by the Beatles, the Oasis. What did Noel Gallagher once describe himself as? Someone said, if you weren't in Oasis, what would you be doing? He said, I'd be in a Beatles cover band. But actually, some people think I'm already in a Beatles cover band. But you look at what influenced Oasis. It was the Beatles. But you look at what influenced the Beatles, and that was rhythm and blues from the early 1950s, mid 50s in America. And I don't know how many British bands would look at those influences now, and actually, probably loads do, and probably they should really.
Yeah, that's such a good point. I honestly hadn't thought of that, and I'm almost sorry that you had to give me that information on a podcast because it's not so secret anymore.
It's not.
But
Absolutely not. But it is. It's just when you start looking at some of that stuff and you start going back and you start realizing that stand up, uh, stand up can just be sort of, what's the word? Not necessarily. It doesn't change, but it can be really. Uh, I'm trying to think of a word here. There's a word in my head, and obviously I've not been doing enough talking since I've been in lockdown. But stand up can basically be a constant. Do you know what I mean? You can go back to the 1800s or the early 2000s and see people that we've forgotten about. People like musical people like Dan Leno, and although we wouldn't get the references because they're talking about weird political stuff at the time, you only need to replace their politician with Boris Johnson, and the joke is exactly the same.
yeah, of course.
That's a really fascinating kind of insight because and on that point in particular, often the style, not the style, that's the wrong word, but the kind of structure of a joke, so that kind of thing you mentioned there is brilliant, and how interesting it must be. There's loads of names there that I must admit I am not familiar with, so I can't wait to go and kind of look up a little bit more. Obviously I've seen some Lenny Bruce. Have you seen on Amazon, by the way, The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel?
Yes, it's brilliant, isn't it?
Oh, fantastic.
It's so good. Yeah, it's so good.
Interesting about The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel is that we love. I really like it. I really like the characters. I really like the costumes. I really like the Lenny Bruce bit. I love all of that sort of stuff. But as a comic, the bit I love, and people never go on about this when they talk about Mrs. Maisel. There's an episode. I think it's in series 1 where she's trying to work out a set, and there's a quick montage where she goes back to this club, the club that her manager runs, and she goes back there again and again. and you see this really quick montage of her trying to come up with little toppers for jokes and the best way
Yeah.
for the structure and the bit of language to work. And that's always my favourite bit of comedy. My favourite bit of comedy is long car journeys with friends of mine where we literally spend an hour and a half trying to work out if that particular word is funnier than that particular word, or would it be funnier
Yes.
if it was there in the joke or there in the joke. Like the minutiae when you get into it a little bit more is one of the other things that is the difference between the okay comics and the amazing comics. And so that bit in Mrs. Maisel where she's going on stage like every night in this montage, just trying to nail this perfect line for this perfect joke. That's one of the other things that I think makes great comics.
It's a really good point, and it's actually something that I kind of can't, I can't come to terms with that at the moment, because as like a musician, if we brand it like that, or a bass player, I can hear a song and I can
Sorry,
play
can I
it.
just say, stop,
I
Sam,
can.
can I stop you for one moment? Did you just say a musician or a bass player?
I'm so glad you called him up on that, because I was going to say the same. It's like, well, if I brand myself as that.
Well, it's the purely reason for that is running joke on the podcast is that I play bass, and
Okay.
whenever I introduce myself to a musician, Fitz always goes, well, ish.
One time I do a thing one time.
I have a thing if I'm on a TV show and there's a 5-piece band. I'm always like, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the 4 magnificent musicians and a drummer.
Yeah, but no, it's really interesting because I can like learn a song at home and play it live, and then if it's not quite right, I can just go back and play it 30 times and it like kind of at home. But you can't do that with comedy. You have to do it in front of an audience. There isn't, or like you say, with some friends, you can't. There's not really as such practice time at home, is there?
You can write. Sorry, after you.
No, go on. I was just about to say that I often say this to people, and I've actually never been able to have a conversation with a musician, open brackets, bass player, close brackets, before. So this, I always say to people that you can't learn stand up at home, and if I was to say to someone, have you ever played the guitar before? And they go, no. And you go, well, I'll tell you what, grab this guitar, go out in public now, and I'd like you to play an original song, please. It has to be good. The audience have to enjoy it. Here you go. This is a guitar. No. You hold it that way up. Right. And so you can't learn comedy at home, but what you can do is try and gig as much as possible in as many different places as possible to make the stage and comedy clubs feel like your home, really.
Oh,
Yeah,
what a
of
wonderfully
course.
way. That's a really, really lovely way of putting it. Yeah, that's
Yeah, it
spot
is
on.
lovely. It is lovely, Fitz, but it also does come with quite an unlovely twist, which is you should be able to reach a point sometimes where, no offense to audiences, you do not give a shit about them, because you have to have places where you know the joke you're working on isn't quite right. You know
Yeah.
the joke you're working on isn't there yet, and so you have to be in a position. Basically, you have to be in a position to fail. You know, you have to be in a position. Comedy is based on failure. Anyone who can't deal with failure, it's not going to work for them, because you have to fail.
And you
Yeah,
have
of
to
course.
what you've alluded to there is kind of the Miss Maisel effect, I guess, of that being not just being not being willing to, but actually being desperate to work on a bit, a line, a word, a tweak, to the point that it gets the desired effect, and then when it does, boom, that's brilliant. That's job
Yes.
done for that
So
one. And
I've got a piece of material which I do quite often, which is based on a true story, 100% true story of being in a car. I supported Russell on tour a few years ago, and we would listen to Jeremy Vine on BBC Radio 2, and when his tour manager was driving him around, and we would text in to Jeremy Vine to see if we could get text read out on the radio. So whatever the subject was, we would try and get a text on. And there was a subject once about noisy pets, and I texted in, "Hello, Jeremy. My neighbours have got a llama. Now the summer months are coming, it makes too much noise, and I can't sit in my garden." And they phoned me up. They phoned me back. They didn't read out the text. They phoned me back to see if I wanted to get on the radio and talk about it. And I did, and I got on the radio, and I we pulled over. I went into a service station. I was on a payphone. I got in to the radio. I talked about my neighbour's llama. At one point, Jeremy asked me to do an impression of the llama. I did an impression of the llama, and there was a vet in the studio with Jeremy, and the vet said that's one of the best llama impressions I've ever heard. And as soon as it happened, I was like, "Oh my good God, I've just written 5 minutes of material. Just by this happening, how can I not make this happen?"
Yeah.
And then when I got back to gigging again, it just didn't work. Just the story didn't work. The build-up was quite nice, and gradually I started getting little jokes along the way, but I just couldn't make the payoff work because a little bit like when you do stuff about sex, good sex is never funny, bad sex is funny. Successes are never funny, failures are funny. And I was on stage once at a gig, actually in Bath. It was Wickham Social Club as part of the Bath Comedy Festival. And I've been trying this bit for ages and it won't work. And I was doing this weird cabaret night. And so I didn't mind too much how things work. And I did this story. And at the end, just for some reason, I genuinely don't know where it came from, Jeremy turns to the vet and says, "What do you think of Mark's llama impression?" And rather than saying that's the best llama impression I've ever heard, the vet said, "That's not a llama, that's an alpaca." And and that was the bit that made the joke. That was the bit that made it work.
Nice.
And there's lots of reasons behind that, and some of them are just things like, as I said, success isn't funny. But there's another. Oh, this is a question. We'll do this as a quiz. Can either of you work out another reason why that is funny?
I've got one that jumped to my mind, but I won't jump in. Sam, have a little think.
I've got nothing, guys. You go, Fitz, and I will see if I can find another one.
So the "k" sound of alpaca. I don't know what. Yes.
Yeah, harsh. For some reason, and I didn't know it until I said it out loud. Alpaca's a funny word, and part of it is because you've got those harsh consonants that work really well. It's why so many swear words have just got the funnier swear words have got the harsh consonants in them, the T's, the K's, and piss is fairly funny, but not as funny, because it's not as harsh. And alpaca just turns out to be a funny word.
It definitely does.
That's so interesting. I've never, hands up, we've had kind of one session about how to start in comedy for myself in kind of my learning time. And I've never ever thought and never been told to even think about what words you're using because of how they come across. I just always thought that the joke was in the story, but that's such a good point, Mark. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, Gary Delaney has got jokes that he's never used because the rhythm of the joke doesn't feel right. Even if it's funny and it's a funny joke, there's something about the rhythm within it that just doesn't really fit.
Amazing.
And then, no, don't get me wrong. Like, the great thing about comedy is that, although there are some rules, the joy is that those rules can be broken and ignored and played with, and all that sort of stuff. And so, just for some reason, every now and then you'll hear a word and you'll go, "Oh, look at that! That's a funny word, isn't it?"
And
That's so true.
what's really interesting as well about the that alpaca bit, for example, is you could quite easily have tried that bit, say 2 or 3 times. 3 kind of is often the magic number for comedians, but you could have tried it 3 times and it wouldn't have worked. And some comics, that might just go in a bin and it would never get kind of thought of again. But because you obviously went on stage and you tried it and you built it and you kind of worked it, you meant, was it kind of like out of nowhere that you just like, oh, I'm going to say alpaca?
Yeah, do you know what it was? I can remember the gig. I can remember what I was doing. I can't remember why I said alpaca rather than anything else. There are certain times when I'm on stage, um, I kind of I chat a lot. I do lots of comparing, but when I do sets, I can be quite loose sometimes as well. And just every now and then, um, I can. I can just say something that like just surprises me, and I don't know where it comes from. I don't know. I often have to remember it or ask someone to remind me, um, because I'm sort of like we. I mean, I imagine you've had this conversation with other comedians on this podcast, but it is. It is a point, and I imagine different people have different opinions on this. Luckily, I'm quite funny. Like I'm, I'm quite a funny person, and so sometimes I just rely on the fact that I'm quite funny. Whereas other people in comedy have learned to be funny. Other people have learned how to do it. Other people have studied or whatever. For me, for my detriment sometimes as well, I'm just sort of naturally quite funny. And that means often I don't work as hard as I should do, but sometimes it does mean that I can accidentally have alpaca turn out to be a brilliant end for a joke.
So we possibly the last time we gigged together was a while ago at Comedia for the new material night, and
Yes.
you very kindly came along to close. And
Was I in a weird mood that night? I was probably weird, right?
No, well, interestingly, we mentioned it on the Compare episode a couple of weeks ago. I don't know if you remember, Sam, but so I've always, whenever I've gigged with you, I've always, if you're comparing, I've always watched kind of how you do it and tried to kind of learn as every comic should, you know. But I remember I was chatting to this guy who had tattoos. You may not even remember, but he had tattoos, and I kind of had a bit of a conversation with him. It went all right, ended on a laugh, and moved on. But when you were on stage, you had a chat with him, and you ended up finding out so much about this guy, and you ended up finding out they had a shark tattooed on his cock. I don't know if you remember that.
Sounds like
Yeah, and then everyone was like, brilliant, right? How on earth we found that? And then you asked, oh, but what way is the shark facing? And it was just a moment where, you know, you could have easily not had that conversation at all. And I just remember thinking, fuck, that's brilliant. You've got to be able to just kind of roll with it. And you know, yeah, that was a great moment.
But also, like, I remember the gig. I remember the tattoos. I don't remember asking that question, but I think it does sort of make sense, doesn't it? Because like you do want to picture if the shark biting his belly or not.
Exactly.
And because so much of comedy is about listening. You know, so much of comedy is about actually, and again, to my to my benefit, but also my detriment as a comic sometimes, is that I'm always in the room, so I'm always there. I've never been able to be a comic who can kind of not necessarily go through the motions, but just be bulletproof and just send it out, send it to the back of the room, boom, boom, boom. I've never been able to do that, so it just means that if a gig is rubbish, although I'll try and make it better, I have to talk about the uh, the things distracting me in the room, or I have to talk about the oddness in the room, and partly that's because I've never been as confident in my material as some other comics are, because I am just frankly just a bit of a bullshitter. So I do enjoy the play. I enjoy that, and so yeah, when I get into a situation when I find out about that, I am probably going to want to know what direction the shark is facing.
That's so good. So, Mark, let's kind of talk about TV warm up if we can,
Yes,
because before Fitz introduced me to you, I've got to be honest, I didn't even realise that was a thing. So,
I mean,
TV warm up.
no, at the moment it's not a thing, mate. So
Well, yeah, that's very, very true. But so you alluded earlier to the fact that it's similar to kind of comparing, but it's a slightly different skill. So what does it involve? What do you do?
So basically, every time there's an audience for a TV show, there'll be a TV warm up, and uh, usually and mainly that is to get the audience up at the beginning. So that audience would have been queuing up outside the TV studio for an hour and a half, sometimes 4 hours. Sometimes I'll be sat
Yeah.
in the holding area. Sometimes I'll be sat in the studio while they wait for things to happen. And so you need someone to basically go out and just frankly stop them looking grumpy. Now, there's a difference between stopping them being grumpy and stopping them looking grumpy. I'm never going to claim that I'm going to cheer these people up, but what I am going to try and do is make sure that the director, producer, commissioners, talent, whoever, have got an audience who on camera um, look great, respond in the right way. And so that's one of the first things you do. You basically teach them how to be an audience, really. And you teach them how to be an audience by being funny. You teach them how to be an audience by being a comic, by being a warm up. You teach them how to respond to funny things by being funny. But you also teach them how to get. You want the particular noises. You want what they call cutaways, which is basically shots of them laughing. Because if you think about it, if you've got 7 cameras on a panel show and you've got Jimmy Carr and 6 contestants, those 7 cameras are pointing at those people. You can't have 7 cameras pointed at them and 7 cameras pointing at the audience because that's just going to double your costs. And so what you do is you spin the cameras back on the audience. So when the panel show isn't happening, we can get those shots from them doing particular things so they can then edit it into the show later on. So there's that, but there's also things go wrong, things break, lights break, celebrities turn up late or need to have a wee. Sometimes, if it's a sitcom, you've got to go on every 5 minutes for 4.5 hours because that's how long a sitcom can take to record. So there's there's lots of different ways for a TV warm up to be, but mainly it is just trying to be charming, but sort of being a host of a dinner party a bit, really.
And how did you first get into it, if you don't mind me
Um,
asking?
yeah, it actually happened not very long after I became a full time comic. Um, uh, I was asked to I was asked to help some people design a comedy club for a TV studio. Basically, they were doing a TV studio called Kings of Comedy, which was sort of Big Brother comedians in a Big Brother style house. They were filming it in Bristol. They wanted a set that looked like a studio. They knew I was regularly compere of a gig in Bristol called Jesters, so they came down the Jesters with me, looked at the gig. I got them in, talked about how gigs run, and then about a week later they said, "Oh, we actually need someone to help us do the warm up on the night. Do you fancy doing it?" And that was my first TV warm up job.
Wow. I just slightly off topic, I think, or on a tangent, let's say. So one of my favorite comics is John Robbins, and I know obviously you guys know each other, but I also know that I think it was the podcast on Radio X, but he talks about doing the warm up for Deal or No Deal and how it was a very short lived thing, but that was something that you did as well, right? And I guess perhaps he was doing it as a favour for you or through you. Is that right?
Yeah, no, he got I sort of I went in. It started in the October, and Stephen Grant and Jeff Whiting were doing the warm up for it.
Okay.
And there was a day or so, maybe 3 or 4 weeks into the run, where one of them couldn't do it, and I ended up doing it. And then I got a couple more, and then by January it was mine, basically.
Amazing.
Like, yeah, they just went, "Oh yeah, we'll get him to do it," because I mean, I'm just quite good at it. Like, I genuinely, I find it a bit weird. I worry sometimes about coming across as a bit arrogant. But the fact of the matter is, for some reason, I'm just good at it. Like, it feels like it's a skill. It feels like it's a job that happens to fit into particular skill sets that I've got, which is kind of being a bit chatty, being a bit charming, not taking yourself too seriously, turning up on time. I'm quite a punctual person. Working in a team, like, I like being a comic, but working in a team and a TV studio works for me. I don't really have the ego that some comics have in terms of wanting to be out there and dominate, and that's why I'm quite happy being a compere, and that's why warm up helps. So it just sort of, it turned out very early on that just one of them things I can do.
And I mean, I've not seen you in action, but obviously I've seen you compare, and yeah, clearly you're very, very good at that. So I imagine you're not. What's the word I'm looking for? I don't think it's being. No, you're not shit. I don't think it's being arrogant to say that you're good at it. You know, I think that's entirely fair enough. I was going to say on the subject of that, or kind of going back to material, I guess. Do you find, or I guess how do you find material is something that certainly Sam's going to be trying to do. Do you have any little words of wisdom for that?
No, fuck him.
It's a tough world, Sam. It's a tough world, mate.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. I'll just fuck it. I'll quit. I'll stick to bass playing.
Okay, so what I would say, firstly, and I don't know, and Sam mentioned this earlier, and I don't know if I agree with it. I think it's cheating if Sam becomes a musical comic.
I agree.
I think
fair enough.
I think it's. I think if you can write a song, you can probably write a joke, and so using the actual. I mean, don't get me wrong. There's some very good musical comics out there, and they are musicians. I just think for this particular exercise, I think it might be more interesting if Sam has to commit to doing straight stand up.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that makes sense.
How does that make you feel, Sam? I can sense your sphincter twitching slightly, but not.
Yeah, it did tighten. It did tighten when you said it, thinking that I'm not going to have a guitar to hide behind. But at the same time, I have a weird ambition to give it a go at like one-liners.
Okay, so this was going to be my next piece of advice, which isn't helpful for you because you want to do one-liners. But I always remember when I started, one of the things you do is you try and remember your material. And I think one of the reasons that so much of my material and so much of so many people's material is anecdotal is because if you do a story about your life and you forget the jokes, you still remember the story. And so therefore, that's going to help you remember the jokes.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Of course. That's
So if you're going out there with 42 one-liners, you're going to have to remember how to present 42 one-liners. Whereas if you went out there talking about the most embarrassing thing that ever happened to you when you were a kid, you even if you forget what you wrote, you're going to be able to have that memory of what happened to you when you were a kid.
No, of course. Well, let's put it this way. In terms of what kind of style comedy I'm going to be, I'm very impressionable, and That's very helpful to know that one-liners is going to be a lot tougher. So we'll probably leave that one in the bag.
But I tell you what, so I mentioned it earlier, the Woody Allen thing. There's a famous Woody Allen album called Stand Up Comic, which I think was like 1955 or so. It's a very old album, and there are two bits of stand up on there. There's one called Moose, and there's one called Kidnapped, and those two bits of stand up are sort of considered by lots of people to be two of the best pieces of stand-up comedy ever written in terms of stand-up as a form, because although it's not a real story, it's basically a linear story of something that happened but frankly didn't happen, but is just a framework for shitloads of amazing jokes.
Right, got you.
Actually,
Yeah, of course.
comic, if you want to go back to my thing about stealing from people who aren't that famous, you don't just have to go old. There's a guy called Ben Moore, who was a contemporary of Stuart Lee and Richard Herring's. I think he did a bit of their TV show back in the 90s. He's done a couple of Edinburgh shows. And he's actually got a book called Super Collider for the Family. And in that book is the transcript of an Edinburgh show called Coelacanth. And it's a story about professional tree climbing, but pretty much every single line of that story is a one-liner, if you can believe that as a thing.
Wow.
That's that. What a feat!
So I can't do it any justice whatsoever. But one of the characters, I think, Dad knew the musician Handel, which helped open loads of doors for him. You know, like that level of brilliant joke, but in the form of a narrative.
Jesus.
Yeah.
Do you remember, speaking of Bristol, do you remember Jack Heel?
Yes.
Who was, I remember seeing him. So Jack Heel, Sam, I'll send you a link to some of his stuff. I'm pretty sure he's certainly he was a medical student, so he's probably a medical genius now, but he did exactly that with his writing. He would have such wonderful wordplay within the kind of form of narrative. I'm definitely going to check out Ben Moore, because I must admit I'm not familiar with him.
Yeah, no, he mainly did Edinburgh shows, but he's done bits of acting as well, so you'd recognise his face from set.
That sounds absolutely amazing. Yeah, I need to. So, what Fitz has done very kindly whilst we've been talking, all of these people that you've kind of mentioned and you had ideas of, he's put on our shared note on our phone, so it is pinging up saying. So I've got quite a long list now that I need to learn and check out. So yeah, I'm looking forward to that. Thank you for all those suggestions.
Oh no, I mean, I am an absolute comedy nerd. Like I just can't help it.
But it's what keeps you going when you're like that, doesn't it? It's like when you've got something that you love and you're so passionate about, it's the reason you still do it. Like that's what makes you kind of get up and go out and do it. Like same for me in music. It's just, I wouldn't want to sit here and do nothing. I would rather be playing an instrument, as I'm sure you would rather be kind of watching or doing or performing a comedy piece.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. But you know what? It's everything. I always think this. I know Fitz like his football. Do you like your football as well, Sam?
I used to. I support Middlesbrough. And
which is why he doesn't really anymore.
Yes, I kind of love to hate it, just because I loved Middlesbrough back in the early noughties, and then things just got from bad to worse.
The Ravanelli times.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, Ravanelli, and then to Viduka and places like that.
But the love, you've lost the love a little bit for it.
Yeah, Middlesbrough have kind of they've killed my heart a little bit. So I'm waiting for magic to happen. Probably won't.
I always think the thing about football is that I'm a big football fan. Fitz is, you used to love football until when you just loved Janino, basically. But so people who love football really love football. They're passionate about their club. They're passionate about watching the game. They absolutely love the game. But I am convinced that even those of us who watch Sky Plus Match of the Day, love everything about football, I'm absolutely convinced that we only know 10%, 20% tops of the way being a footballer really is.
Yeah.
The way
Yeah, of
the way
course.
clubs run within themselves, the way training is done, the way like I'm convinced that no matter how much you love football, if you're a football fan, you don't really know. Well, we don't know the names of the main agents. We don't know the names of, the main places that people train. Whereas people in comedy know the names of all the agents. They know how people are connected, and I think that's the same with a knowledge of football and the knowledge of comedy. If you are a professional footballer, you know that in training you run all these drills where you can play a blind pass behind you because that's the passage of the play where your fullback will be overlapping and running on. Whereas if we tried to do that playing football in the park, we'd just like absolute idiots, right?
One thing you have done there is, oh my god, I cannot wait for football to come back. That's a whole other conversation. But oh my god, I've literally just listening to you going, yes, fullbacks overlapping, yes.
But imagine if the three of us were playing a game. There were me, Fitz, and Sam. We were against three other comedians, and we're in a park, and we're just about to play. And I went up to both of you and go, "Okay, just to let you know, this passage of the play is the one where Fitz overruns, runs out from fullback, and Sam goes into." And you'd look at me and you just go, "What are you talking about? We're literally." Come on,
That's so
come on.
true.
We're gegenpressing today. We're gegenpressing. And you'd go, stop talking nonsense. We're just having a laugh. But when you start doing stand up, things like the alpaca K, things like pullback and reveals, things like just all the things that you collect from doing stand up is the same as that.
Car journeys when you spend loads of time, as you said earlier, kind of just going over a tiny little joke, that kind of thing, right?
Absolutely. But you know what? Everyone's got it. Musicians have got it.
Yeah.
Bakers have got it. People who sell insurance have got it. Everyone who is really good at their job has got the skills that we, as people who love it, don't really know. We don't really understand it as much, and so unfortunately with stand up, because it seems so accessible, and it is so accessible, that's the joy of it, is that at the beginning people can think, oh, hold on, why aren't I doing very well? Or the audience can go, oh, why isn't that person not doing very well? Because you need to do it for a year. You need to do 100 gigs. You need to. The great comic Adam Bloom said to me, don't even worry about your voice in inverted commas until you've done 100 gigs. Just keep doing it.
Yeah, it's so true, and that kind of seems to be some of the most solid advice that I've got. Is that you're not gonna it's comedy is not something that you can get right every time. It's something that you slog at to make sure that you're on your game.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a proper. It can be really not arduous because it's not physical work, but like so many things, it's repetition. Did you ever see any of those when Prince died, and there was footage of him? There was one footage, I think it was at a George Harrison memorial concert, playing the guitar, and like he was just someone who could do everything, but also do everything with the utmost ease possible.
Yeah, of course.
And that's because
Yeah.
Prince, like, started making music when he was about 17
Yeah.
and did it pretty much every day of his life.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah, there's one song from Prince that I know that he didn't add bass to, and it was the happiest day of his life that he managed to put out a song that had no bass line in it. and he could just fill it with other instruments, and he was just so excited. So I can only imagine that kind of that same style of passion, if you can bring that over to comedy and just think to yourself, well, I've got this idea of a joke and then it finally works, it clicks, and that's why you love it.
Yeah, absolutely. But it's quite a famous Malcolm Gladwell thing about 10,000 hours, that if you do something for 10,000 hours, you'll master it. And he always uses the Beatles in Hamburg as the example. But actually, you can use the Beatles in Hamburg as an example. You can use Prince as an example. Or you can use the person who makes sausage rolls down at Hart's Bakery underneath Bristol Temple Meads as an example. Because if they've done 10,000 hours of their sausage rolls, they've made some bloody brilliant sausage rolls. And all of those skills are as valid as each other, I think, because I love effort, I love work, and I love passion for football, music, comedy, or pastry. I love it all.
one of my I would say you're one of the people that I see on Twitter quite frequently, which I love, and we'll come on to in a moment one of the things that I'm seeing a lot of at the moment. But I would say roughly 10% of your tweets mention Hart's Bakery, and I flipping love Hart's Bakery. That's one of the things I miss about being in Bath and Bristol more than anything. It's incredible. Hart's Bakery.
Yeah, I know. It really is. I'm sorry for bringing back all these lovely memories that you can't have.
There will come a time where I can go back up to Bristol for sure. So I mean, I guess that kind of leads nicely on to how you've been spending lockdown. So I mean, I know from knowing you how kind of busy you've been, but would you mind sharing a little bit about what you've been up to, I guess in lockdown, really, if that's cool?
Yeah, masturbating. Just a lot of masturbating, really. Loads of it. Are you talking about some of the charity stuff?
Oh yeah, there's. Oh, you did charity stuff as well. Oh,
Yeah,
cool, nice. Yeah, let's find out about that, man. That'd be great.
A masturbating marathon.
Absolutely, sponsor me.
10,000 hours.
10,000 hours. Oh man. Yes. So in lockdown, I have been making a panel show because I do the warm up for so many panel shows. I wanted to do something where I just tried it really, and I'm working with a TV producer, and we got this format, and we put that on YouTube. The other thing, and which is really fun. It's really fun to do,
And
but
really good as well. Really good.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, no, we're really chuffed with some of the guests that we're able to get. It's ace, and I'm really happy with it. And then the other thing that I do, is so I do this thing in January every year, and I'm trying to spread it around the country, and I think we will. Belly Laughs, which is I put in comedy clubs in restaurants in January when they're quiet, get money for the restaurants, and they get the food, and then the punters pay about a tenner for the comedy, and that goes straight to charity. And we'll do that again in January, and maybe we'll do it again when restaurants are reopen as a way of getting people back into restaurants, giving them a little bit of a kick up the bum to start going out again. But because no one can go out at the moment, I came up with this idea. I came up with it, from coming up with it to doing it was about 2 weeks, which was Belly Laughs Online, which was basically a celebration of Bristol, a celebration of the city I live in, raising money for 4 charities, with lots of other comedians and lots of other people sending in stories, facts, songs, skits, all about the city that we love. And we did that last week, and we made about £37,000, which was we set the target at £5,000, and we made 37. So
That's mad.
I think that's a fair success.
Congratulations, mate. That's huge. What an effort.
We did one in Cardiff last night, and the format in the loosest possible sense. We're going to do one in Lancashire.
Devon, we've got one in Devon being planned.
We're hoping to do one in Devon, Yorkshire, but also opening it up to football, theatre, music, because I don't know if you've been watching lots of or any of the sort of online streamed gigs for comedy, I don't necessarily think they're they're all incredibly successful, because I think there's something about stand up as a form actually works with the dialogue between performer and audience, and I think that's lost a little bit at the moment on online. I think there are ways to get around it, but we've looked at how maybe some of the things that we could do to get around some of those problems. And my lodger and friend is a great comic called Matt Ewins.
Oh, I flipping love Matt. Oh my god.
And we talk a lot about the way things. He's a very tech comic as well, so he knows his stuff.
Mm.
And we talk a lot about how things look and how things feel and pacings of things and all that sort of stuff. And we basically came up with this idea: get loads of people to send in videos, make the videos 2 or 3 minutes long. If we think they need a punch up in the edit, we'll give them a little punch up in the edit. We play those out while I stream live from my front room and react to everyone. And it worked. It really worked. And the show in Cardiff was great last night. The show in Manchester, I mean, if they get the Lancastrian people that they've got, or that they have a list for, or they have possibly able to get, that show will just be insane. Have a think in your head of celebs, musicians, and comedians who live in the Lancashire
I
area.
was literally just thinking that. Yeah, wow.
It's absolutely insane what they could achieve when they do that. So that's really exciting. And so yeah, so that's been my thing for lockdown, really. Just keeping myself busy and trying to do good things for people.
And when on the subject of belly laughs, I know it's been going a few years. When did that all get started?
So I did the first Belly Laughs gig in January the 7th, 2018, and I came up
Wowzers.
with the idea for it December the 20th, 2017. So I came up with that idea while doing the warm up for the Channel 4 show Big Fat Quiz of the Year.
Oh, wicked.
It's a very long show, a very long record, and I came up with this idea. Went on social media, went on Twitter, and by the end of the show, I'd already had the idea planned, the structure planned, and a couple of venues lined up as well. And so we've gone on from there. And again, we'll try and do some more physical versions of that. And it's basically putting on gigs in places that shouldn't have comedy. And actually, Sam, this is another thing for your notebook. Have you got your special over page of your notebook?
I have indeed, yeah. It's a note on my phone, but so it's a bit more techie.
No, this is my. These are all new bits of advice that I've learned in the last couple of weeks, linked to Belly Laughs Online, but also I think it's right for comedy. You know, when someone says to you, Sam, about, you've heard the phrase, "The secret of comedy is timing," right?
Yeah.
You've heard that phrase. We've all heard that phrase. And we know what that phrase means, right? We know that it means the comedic pause, or the rat-a-tat-tat of a comic. You know, that's what you think it means, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, it doesn't mean that. The secret of comedy of timing, what it really means is do it and fuck off as quickly as possible. That's the secret. Whatever you do, get in, do it, get out. Comics, audiences don't mind bad comedians. They just mind bad comedians who are going to take up too much of their time. You have to be a brilliant stand-up to be able to keep people occupied for an hour or an hour and a half. You have to be a brilliant stand-up to be able to do a 45-minute set in a club. Whereas actually, it's all about pace. It's all about boom, get in, get out before they've noticed you. You know, it really is. Yeah, it's all about pace. Do not hang about.
Which
In,
you
hang out.
That's so good.
you definitely haven't hung about. As I say, the turnaround time for those belly laughs is monumental, and it feels like it's been going much longer than 2 years, which is
It's really stupid, isn't it? Yeah, I know. And we organised, I came up with the idea for Belly Laughs Online in the middle of the night, on a Friday night just over 2 weeks ago. And I woke up needing a pee because that's what you do when you get to your 40s. And at about 4
and
a.m.,
30s. Don't worry.
and I had this idea, and I went to bed. And when I woke up, the idea was still with me. And I woke up on the Friday, and by the Saturday morning, I'd had 4 charities involved, loads of comics involved. I'd had a website built. Like I'd had a website. Sam Healer, the great local comic, who's also a tech genius, built me an uploader website in less than 24 hours.
Wow.
By the Saturday afternoon, we'd done a pilot of it to make sure that the tech and everything had worked. So yeah, just over 24 hours after coming up with the idea, it was advertised, it was out there, and it was ready to rock and roll. Oh, I do
Jeez.
not timing, mate. You know, we go back to fullbacks. It's all about time. It's all about pace. That's what you want, pace.
Nice.
That's so good. What a great bit of advice. Just get in. Your first one, you're going to be shit. Get out.
Yeah, don't hang about, mate. Do not hang about.
That's so good.
Mr. Olver, thank you so much for today, man. I would happily chat to you all day, but we've taken up over an hour of your time. But it's been an absolute pleasure. Really nice to talk to you again. It's been ages, and yeah, huge well done for all the work that you're doing and continue to do. And thank you for your help with Sam as well. I'm sure your
No,
Olver page.
I'm really excited. I'm now trying to work out if when the gig actually happens, if the best case scenario is Sam does absolutely brilliantly, or whether it'd be really funny if he dies on his ass. And I can't work out what would happen.
Well,
Well,
Scott
look,
Bennett.
it's
Oops, sorry. I was just going to say Scott Bennett. We interviewed a couple of weeks ago, and he said that I've got an easier task because if I can go on stage and tune a guitar, then I'll get a round of applause. So the pressure's off for me. But yeah, we don't want to see Sam die on his ass. But equally, it'd be entertaining, wouldn't it?
I mean,
it,
how long have Status Quo been going on? What, 3 chords?
yeah, too long. Too long.
That's a whole
Yeah.
different podcast, that is.
yeah. Don't even get me started on the Telecasters and their 3 chords. You're absolutely right.
Oh, mate. Well,
and yeah, and we'll talk very soon.
So we will point everyone in your direction, both for emergency broadcast comedy and for all the belly laughs stuff on Twitter. But yeah, it's been an absolute pleasure, Mark. Thank you so much, and enjoy the rest of your day. You legend, Mark Olver.
Mark Olver, everybody. That was just incredible, wasn't it?
Mate, what a lovely guy, and B, just what an interesting guy. You know, so many kind of comics that I have heard names of, and I guess perhaps you wouldn't have even heard their names. For you to, well, for us both to go and have a little look at, and just great advice, lovely. I could have chatted to him all day.
Yeah, I totally agree. And what I tell you what, I'm going to pinpoint that bit of advice. Actually, what a great bit of advice that is. You know, don't necessarily go out and try and be like those people that are kind of out there now and doing their stuff now. Don't emulate them. Go back and do some research into the earlier ones and kind of get some bits from them. Again, not taking jokes, but just kind of look at their mannerisms and the way they put out the comedy. I think that's such an impactful bit of advice for anybody that's trying to get into comedy right now.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that, to draw inspiration from people who history remembers, but perhaps people that, they're clearly not on the circuit at the moment. So you can't offend them by kind of taking their style. And, the stand-ups that are performing today obviously learned from their predecessors, so I think it was really, really interesting to talk to him. I think the work that he's done in lockdown with emergency broadcast comedy, which do go and check that out because they're really fun little panel shows, and he's had some incredible guests on: Rachel Parris, James Acaster, Sarah Millican, Gary Delaney, I think were on them as well. So he's had a real who's who of great comics already, and I hope that it's something that he'll continue, because I say this not knowing much about TV production, but hopefully it's not too kind of difficult for them to make, and hopefully they carry it on, because I thought it was wicked. Really love it.
Yeah, I totally agree. And so Fitz, at the intro, you alluded to something very, very cryptic.
Fanfare, please. I did. So, Belly Laughs, which is the thing that Mark came up with just a couple of years ago, incredibly. It has really, really taken off. And he mentioned that when we recorded, they'd just done one the night before in Cardiff, and he's looking to get it in a few other places. Well, ladies and gents, a comusician exclusive for you. We are going to be, Sam and I are both going to be involved with as well in some small way, in Belly Laughs Devon at home, which is going to be a celebration of all things Devonian. Must remember to order some scones or scones. Do you say scones or scones?
It changes depending on who my company is.
Nice. So in our dear listeners' company?
I'm going to go with scone.
Nice. Okay, cool.
Yeah. We swear on this pod, so I'm going to go with scone.
Okay, nice. So yeah, I think that there'll probably be someone putting jam on first or cream on first, whichever one the Devon one is. I can't remember.
I never know.
I'll Google that before. But yeah, so the hope is that it will be a mishmash, of some really cool content, and ultimately the aim of the game is to raise as much money as we can for local charities. So keep an eye out. I think the Twitter is at Belly Laughs Dev, DEV for Devon. And certainly if not, then we will be sharing the link and profile and information from our comusician socials as well. If you want to go and check out Mark Olver, which I'm sure you do, he's an absolute legend. Where can you do that, Sam?
So he is at Mark Olver everywhere, as far as we can tell.
Yeah, Mark Olver, MarkOlver, like Oliver, but without the I. I'm sure lots and lots of people have made that point. But yeah, it was just fascinating, and it was really nice to chat to him. Like I say, he did so much to help me in my early career. The little gigs he talked about and the little things he mentioned, that was where I first got into comedy, and doing those weird little gigs in weird little pubs, and that's really where you learn the craft. And yeah, so it was fascinating to chat to him again, and really inspired me to get ready and jump back into comedy as soon as we can.
100%. Yeah, well, look, thank you very much to you, Mark, and to you, Fitz, for today.
And to you, dear sir, thank you. So as we record, I'm going to go now and see my little girl for a little bit, and then go and do this goddamn virtual gig later on. So we will let you know how that went on next week's pod, dear listener.
Try not to flop.
I will do my best. Right, see you soon, mate. Love you, bye.
See you soon. Love you, bye.
Goodbye, dear listener.
Thank you for listening to Comusician Pod. Intro music was Gangster Life by Dirty Blueprint. This podcast was brought to you by Fitz and Sam. See you next week.